All right, folks. So we've been talking quite a bit about the animal component to rangelands grazing systems, and now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk more specifically about how each animal or how each type of animal goes about foraging. So if you have a chance and can look through this YouTube link or watch this YouTube link that's listed on this slide here, your day will be instantly better. So you may have seen it in other classes as well, but I always like to show it as an opening to prehension. And so prehension mechanisms refers to how animals actually gather their food to be digested, so how they eat basically. So the objectives of this lecture is to identify differences between herbivores and carnivores, their food gathering abilities, and their prehension mechanisms, and to identify why each species has a different prehension mechanism. And we're going to talk a little bit about preferences from a dietary standpoint, and then why multi-species grazing is so important. So when we look at the two major types of consumers that we have on rangeland from an animal perspective, we've got our herbivores that are primarily going to be eating vegetative material, and then we have our carnivores that are going to be eating our herbivores, honestly. So when we look at how they source their food, they are going to, it's really going to come down to the mobile ability of that food. So herbivores have a stationary food source, whereas carnivores are mobile. So that really plays into how much energy they expend trying to capture their nutrients. In a vegetation setting where there's lots of rangeland and our herbivores are eating a lot of hemicellulose and cellulitic materials, those are going to be pretty abundant. However, our carnivores are going to have very, very rare presence of nutrients because they're going to be hunting animals that are mobile. So they're going to have developed predation aversion um, characteristics. So they're going to be trying to avoid predators at all costs. So this really plays into the type of grazers that we have on rangeland. So we first have our producers that are going to make up the first stage of the food source. We have our primary consumers. These are going to be like our cows or our herbivores that are going to eat the producers. And then we've got our secondary consumers, which are going to be our carnivores. And then we get to be the tertiary consumer because we eat carnivores. So, as we continue to look at the difference between herbivores and carnivores, when it comes to the energy that's expended to capture their food, herbivores spend um, quite a bit less time actually capturing their food, whereas carnivores are constantly stalking and putting in a lot of effort to capture their food. So they're putting in a lot of time and a lot of energy in their food capture. The From a vegetative standpoint, herbivores are much more successful than carnivores in capturing nutrients. And our herbivores are going to expend quite a bit of energy per day. So they're going to actually take approximately 10,000 bites per day because they have to gather so many more nutrients that are pretty poor quality as far as total carbohydrates and energy compared to the carnivore's diet. So that relates directly to the percentage of intake. Our herbivores are going to have lots of intake or a pretty high amount of intake, whereas our carnivores are going to be taking in a very small amount of total material. When we look at the quality of the food between our two major categories, herbivores are going to be using food that is going to be low and highly variable in protein and energy. So just keep in mind this is going to be, you can think about this in terms of seasonality. So in the springtime in annual grasslands, our forbs and our grasses are pretty high in protein. However, as we move into the summer and those annual grasses die off, they're going to be much less are going to have much less protein content. So, for the majority of the year. So, those plant species are going to be pretty poor in terms of protein for a greater percentage of the year. Our carnivores, on the other hand, are going to always consume a high amount of high quality protein. So, in those protein sources, like the rabbits and the mice and things that are getting ate on a regular basis by our carnivores, are really uniform in protein and energy. Our herbivores are going to consume material that has a high fiber content, and those are going to be mostly in the cell wall of the plant, whereas our carnivores are going to not consume very much fiber or cell wall content because they can't break it down, so there's not really any point for them to consume it. And these really relate to um, the cell or the cell wall material. So in our plant cell wall that we see here, we've got lots of cellulose and hemicellulose that are making up the structure of that wall. And then our animal cell is a fat lipid bilayer. So we've got lots of content in the center of the cell, but there isn't very much hemicellulose or structural materials like in plant cells. So, from a digestion standpoint, our herbivores are going to chew their material sometimes twice, whereas our carnivores have very little chewing that actually takes place. So, they're going to kill the animal and then intake it as fast as possible. So, this really relates to the complexity of their digestive tract. So, our herbivores are going to have a very complex digestive tract where they have four compartments to their stomach, and carnivores are going to have a very simplistic monogastric digestive tract. So, our herbivores are going to have to go through the digestive process at multiple stages. Because they're digesting so much hemicellulose and cellulose, they're going to have to utilize microbial fermentation to actually make this process happen efficiently. So we can see if we look at the two pictures on this slide here, the top one, this is a rumen, the inside of a rumen. So we see lots of folds, lots of scalping, where all of the bugs are going to live and attach. And then we have a monogastric stomach down here at the bottom. And this is going to be very smooth because it's not really housing very many bugs. All right, so just one final comment in regards to the diet that our carnivores are going to be consuming is their diet is going to be very low in cellulose, so they're actually going to consume protein directly, and they're going to have to go through the catabolism process to produce energy from that protein process. So it's different from fermentation, but the end result tends to be the same. They're going to have energy of some sort, just the way that they get that energy is very different. All right, so our mammalian digestive systems can be broken down into three major categories based on the three types of animals that we've talked about in previous lectures. Our carnivores, omnivores, and herbivores have a very simplistic, moderately simplistic, and very complex digestive system, respectively. So the ability for an animal to actually digest cellulose is directly correlated to the complexity of that digestive system. Our carnivores cannot digest cellulose, therefore they have a very simple system. Our omnivores have some capacity to digest cellulose, therefore their digestive system gets a little more intense. Our small intestines get a little longer, and we have a longer colon or large intestine. And then our herbivores, like our ruminants, have to have lots of capacity for absorption and breaking down of the food sources. So they have a very large stomach that usually comes in multiple compartments, very large small intestine, a very large intestine, and then and lower GI tract as well. So the digestive system that a range animal has is directly correlated to what type of diet they have. So as we look more closely at the skeletal structure of the heads of our different type of animals that we see on rangeland, we can see some major differences. So our carnivore has a pretty wide head set, omnivore is intermediate, and our herbivore has a very long skeletal structure, but it's not very wide. So, some of the major differences between the three types of animals we find on rangeland have to do with the total size of the skeletal structure, the eye set of the different skeletal structures, the teeth associated with each type of animal, and then the total or the total mass or the total width of the actual mouth portion. And this is directly related to how the animals are going to uh, obtain their food or go through the prehension mechanism. So for example, let's talk about eye set first. So our carnivores are going to have very large eyes and they're going to be set on the front part of the skeleton. So they're always looking out ahead of them. They have very good eyesight so that they can see minimal movement of their predators. Omnivores have an intermediate set, so they're set partially in the front part of the skeleton, but they can also see off to the side. And then our herbivores their eyes are going to be set off to the side so that they can see almost in a 360-degree fashion. All right, so when we look at the teeth structure, our carnivores are going to have canine teeth that are going to be very important for, and you can see a canine right here. This guy fell out. Very important for killing their prey. And then they're going to have very large, sharp teeth to help break down that material so that they can swallow it very quickly. Omnivores are going to have a combination of canines that are going to help to kill their prey if they're eating a protein source. And then they also are going to have smaller teeth towards the front that are going to help them to break down the concentrate material in the grasses. And then they have some very large molars in the back to help break down that material as well. Our herbivores, on the other hand, only have a couple of teeth on the front, and most likely, most of our herbivores only have a bottom set of teeth, and then they have a dental pad on top. And we're going to talk about why that's important here in just a few minutes. And then they have a series of molars on the top and the bottom that are very wide that allow grounding, and the chewing actually makes more surface area available to the bugs when they swallow. All right, so that's just a few of the differences between our carnivores, omnivores, and herbivores from a skeletal structure standpoint. And we'll talk more about the diet in the next